So let me walk through the checklist, and this is essentially the checklist to maximize your exchange of time for money. So remember, in your practice, there's four major categories of profit. There's overhead factors, and we cover that separately. There's about 5 major reasons why your overhead will be higher. So if we control the overhead a little better, we increase our profitability. Number 2 is the fees we charge. Obviously, initially we want to maximize our exchange of time for money, and then we want to start maximizing the amount of money per unit of time. And so there's strategies to do that. We'll talk about those later. And the reason we talk about them later is because they don't have the greatest impact. So the single greatest impact of the 4 major categories is patient education, patient retention. So that's why all business starts with patient education, patient retention. So remember, there's essentially 3 major types of patient retention. There's the market forces. That's what the people give you when you're not very good. There's what's called essentially functional capacity. That's essentially when patients come in for treating their problem, essentially through the phases of healing. And then there's what's called the chiropractors call it the maintenance, but it's not maintenance. It's lifestyle care. So those are the 3 different types of care. And then the 4th major category is marketing, getting new business. So those are the 4 categories to maximize your profitability. Patient education has the greatest, fastest impact, number 1. And then when you go to marketing, remember there's 3 major categories of marketing. First major category is where the 8% that are looking for a chiropractor, where do they go first? So that's one category. Then there's a second category, and of course that's called advertising, because they're looking for a chiropractor. And then remember, the first places they go is typically their family member or friend. That's why we always want to be at least once a week communicating with our past patients. Number 2 is they'll Google their insurance company. That's why we do insurance videos. Number 3, they'll Google their location for a chiropractor. That's why we do Google for Business. Number 4, they'll Google their condition. That's why we'll create condition videos. And number 5 is your sign. So that's typically the 5 areas where the patients, when they're looking for a chiropractor, they'll go, and they typically go in that order. So we want to fulfill those categories. Good and bad news is they're looking for chiropractors, so you're just looking to get a few more than your fair share than your other local chiropractors. And the bad news is 92% of the people out there are not looking for a chiropractor. So the good news about that number is 75% of them have a chiropractic problem to some degree: back pain, neck pain, arthritis, joint pain, things like that. They're just not looking for a chiropractor. So that's when we use educational sales. Educational sales works really well. And then we start from the circle of influence. So remember, it works really well because we establish need. We cover all the major categories of marketing. Number 1, we have a target market. Number 2, we establish need. Number 3, we minimize the obstacles of money and time. And we affect trust. And that's the most powerful marketing you can do when you know how to do that. That's called educational sales. That's what gets a lot of business. And then we'll start from the circle of influence, because it's the easiest, to the outer. So you can do educational sales with cold calls, which is fine because there's still a big market out there. But obviously, if we already know the people, there's some degree of trust, and we already know they have a chiropractic problem, we're already 50% there. So having said that, that's why we have the spouse. So what are the educational sales marketing systems? Number 1 is the spouse referral system on day 5. That's the very first new patient you should be going after. And then there's the reactivation marketing system. Those are easier patients to get because they already know, trust, and like you. And then there's the monthly in-office promotions, and that just stays with the core. We just work with the circle of influence first. We work with the 20%ers and the 3%ers. So your highest probability of business is your 3%ers circle of influence. That's where you have the highest probability of getting new patients. And then you have the highest probability if you use educational sales versus advertising or publicity. And then it goes out from there, from the inner to the middle circle of influence to the outer circle of influence to cold calls. So that's the degree of effectiveness. And then the same with educational sales. You can get anywhere from 55 to 75% of the business. Advertising only gets about 1%. Passive referrals are 7%. Leads are 15%. So obviously educational sales is where all the business is at. When you know how to do that and you apply it to circle of influence. So that's so you got the spouse referral system, you got the reactivation, you got the monthly in-office promotion, you got the monthly kids health day. And that's 4. Number 5 is let's see, you've got the referral system. After every re-report from a re-exam, basically they should be going through an educational sales circle of influence dialogue. That's steady, regular business. And that's what all these systems do. When they're systems and they're put in place, they regularly create new patients. And then the big ones is the personal injury or the VIP dinner. In other words, doing educational sales presentations to your 20%ers, their family members and friends. And then from there, it's the personal injury attorney educational sales. And then the new patient orientation. That's a real solid, does 3 things. It increases the doctor's conviction level tremendously, number 1. Number 2, it creates real solid referrals. That's one of the best places to get a real good referral because they're already doing better and they already know, like and trust you by the time that new patient orientation happens. And that should be every 2 weeks on a Wednesday at 6 o'clock for all the new patients. And then, so we said the VIP dinner, the new patient orientation, and then there's a new patient educational sales presentation you can do with cold calls. So you can do the same exact presentation, and there's various degrees of effectiveness depending on how well you know the person, if they have problems or not. Is there some degree of trust involved? So there's different levels from a total cold call to the best that there is, which is a 3%er bringing in an inner circle of influence. That's the absolute highest probability of target market you can reach and the most effective. And then when we go from there, the next one is medical doctor referrals for personal injury cases. So those are the core. That's the second major category, and that's actually where you create more business than you physically can handle. Now remember, all of these are checklists. They're systems. And then you go to the third marketing system, which is the worst kind. That's cold call and it's advertising. So if you were going to do it, what would you do first? Well, you would do Google pay-per-click for location-based keywords because those people were already looking for a chiropractor. Then you would do Facebook because you can control so many variables with Facebook. And if you do some things right with Facebook, it significantly increases the effectiveness, like capturing their email and name and with a video follow-up series. So that significantly helps. And then there's Yelp advertising. Well, nobody's going to Yelp looking for a review for a chiropractor in your area unless they're looking for a chiropractor. So you pretty much know when you advertise for that name in Yelp, they're not going to see unless there's a need. So those would be the top 3 advertising you would do first, and that's why you would do it. And it would be Google pay-per-click first, Yelp second, Facebook third, because there's no perceived need with Facebook. And you would only do it if you had a video series, the educational sales video series opt-in. And then everything goes way down from there. Local newspaper, direct mail, flyers, inserts, discount mailers, even a little bit of radio or TV. Everything just goes way, way down from that point forward. So you just have to pick. You got to pick your systems. Most of the time, the guys that do really well don't do a lot of systems. What they'll do is they'll typically, the good news about educational sales is once you learn it, it applies to all of these categories. So you don't have to learn 10 different systems. You learn one system and then you apply it to 10 different vehicles, whether it's a spouse referral, regular referral, monthly in-office promotion, kids health day, day 5 spouse referral. All of those, the core components are the same. That's why it's so nice. It's all educational sales and it works real well. So you don't have to learn a lot, but what you do learn, you have to be good at. You don't have to be good at all to spend money on advertising. You can just pay somebody to do pay-per-click, and that'll be the most expensive, worst type of business you'll ever get. I would say you'll never be able to pay enough in advertising to keep yourself busy. You won't be able to do it. So there's the marketing systems. Those are all the systems to exchange your time for money. That's it. And then we look at 7 major reasons why a practice. And so these are the checklists that you should be looking at. You go, well, where am I? Where am I on this checklist? And then you look at the 7 major reasons why a practice doesn't grow. There's typically one of 7 major reasons, and there's 5 different growth phases of a practice, from starting a practice to managing a practice and not practicing it at all, just managing it. So there's 5 different levels. All 5 of those levels have a different problem, and it's usually one of 7 reasons. It's usually a space issue, a labor issue, equipment issue, a knowledge issue, a skill issue, a motivation issue, or a HR human systems issue. In other words, having staff and trained staff. That's it. I just explained how to maximize your profitability in a practice. That's it. You have limited time and money. So the more, generally speaking, the more you know and the more you do, the more effective things are. The more you try to put off onto somebody else or pay somebody else to do it, the least effective they are. And that's just
space, labor, equipment, motivation, HR, and what was the other one?
Space, labor, equipment, knowledge, skill, motivation, and HR systems. So that's why, like when we looked at you and you go, okay, you were kind of just getting your practice started. Well, motivation is not going to be an issue. So that's why we focused on patient retention immediately. And you pretty much took your practice, I think, from 20 to 40 visits a week up to 60 visits a week by yourself, right?
Mhm.
That didn't take
Well, it sure helped, boss. I'm not gonna
no,
say I
no, 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 no. When I say by yourself, I'm talking about you didn't have staff to do it. You were there doing,
right.
you were there doing, okay. So now you're running up against your next barrier. So it's probably not, I haven't seen your space yet, but with 60 visits a week, you don't need a lot of space.
I I just implemented some more stuff, so we have more stations, more stuff, so there won't be nobody has to wait. Trying to do as fast as
Well,
possible.
again, I'm suggesting, because I haven't looked at each of these systems, so I'm suggesting that space isn't an issue, labor is not an issue, or labor is an issue with you.
Right.
Equipment's not typically going to be an issue for the most part, and when you're that low. Um, and then it's knowledge or skill, and most chiropractors have a knowledge or skill problem. That's where most of the problems are. Motivation gets to be a problem once chiropractors start making about $150,000 a year, seeing about 120 visits a week. And then from that point up, it's really a knowledge skill problem. You start, or a systems problem. It's knowledge, skill, and systems, because space, labor,
I
and
think that's
equipment.
it, Paul. I think those three are the biggest. The knowledge, skill, and systems in place.
Well,
Um,
they're all different depending on where you are in your business.
right.
And the only way to determine that is a practice analysis. So that's why we'll do a statistical analysis to see where your dropping out patients are and how fast you're dropping them out. Then we'll do a marketing analysis, and we'll look at the different categories of marketing, and we'll see where the problems are, where you're getting patients, where you're not getting patients, where you're spending your time or money that's least effective. So once you're good at the patient education part and you start keeping patients, then we start paying attention to the marketing. Generally, we go into the first category of marketing, where the 8% go first, because they're already looking for a chiropractor.
Right.
So it's much easier to get somebody who's already looking for a chiropractor than to do educational sales to get somebody who's not looking for a chiropractor. So that's why we say, we want to communicate with our past patients, not just for their reactivations, but their family members and friends who are going to be looking for a chiropractor. That's why we do the insurance videos. That's why we do the reviews, Google for Business reviews. That's why we do the condition videos and our office signs. So if we at least fill those gaps, if we at least have those systems in place, we're going to get a few more new patients than the chiropractor next door. And then we go, okay, then we plug those into your patient retention, which should be pretty decent by now. And then the practice comes up in a whole nother level. Now, with you, it's different. All this, it's always the same with all the different offices. You're just at a different level. So in the beginning, was space, labor, equipment, or motivation an issue? No. So we started doing patient retention. Immediately, you start keeping the patients you did get. You shoot right up to 60 visits. So what's the limiting factor now is you don't have 12 arms. That's the limiting factor. And when you hit to 60 visits a week, because patients come in at a limited time. Doctors think they have 8 hours a day to work with patients, and they don't.
Right.
It's called industrial hours. So what are industrial hours? Industrial hours are when the patients can come in. That's typically in the morning, 9 to 10:30, in the early afternoon when you open, 2 to 2:30, and after work, 4 to 6 is the main rush. Outside of that, trying to get them to come in is like trying to force you to have breakfast at 3 o'clock in the morning. So it goes totally against market forces. So you only have about 4 hours a day. That's it. 4 hours a day. And how are you going to maximize those 4 hours a day? Well, you've taken it up pretty much to what you can do on your own. So you're already with a patient and the phone's ringing and there's another patient walking in. Well, there you go. You've capped. You can't grow. Matter of fact, you probably have no marketing systems going on whatsoever because you're just trying to maintain who's coming through the door because you don't have anybody else to help you. So the bad news is you absolutely have no possibility in hell to grow. So at that point, everything turns to hiring the first employee. Nothing can happen without that first employee. Nothing. It's not worth doing any marketing. It's not worth spending any money on marketing. It's not worth doing anything. So that's what's necessary to get the first person, and that frees you up to see more people. Now they'll schedule appointments, answer the phone, all that stuff, and they start helping with marketing. We teach them some of the basics of the in-office marketing things. So you get freed up to see more patients, and now we start doing more marketing, so you start seeing a few more new patients. We put those back into your patient retention system, and it comes back up again. Typically, it shoots up to around 120. A lot of times that 110 to 130 mark is another place chiropractors puts out. Usually it's not a space, labor, or equipment problem. Usually it's a motivation problem and a knowledge and skill problem. So you know something, you're decent at keeping patients, but chances are you're not a black belt at marketing. Chances are you're just getting a few more new patients than your neighbor, and you know how to keep them. That'll get you to about 120 visits a week, roughly. So the next level is to learn the educational sales marketing, because that's when it really takes off, because that's when you can create business at will. But now you need a second employee. So you have to be freed up, because you're not making any money putting people on and off therapy. You make money adjusting people, doing exams and adjusting people. And you make the most amount of money per unit of time adjusting a spine. It takes 3 minutes, 1 to 3 minutes, and you make $50 to $100. So everything in your business is geared to get you to that point. And everything else is geared to get you to stop doing everything else. That's how you grow the practice. You stop doing things and you have to learn how to leverage them off. And now you have to learn how to be a manager, trainer, and then evaluate your statistics, interpret your statistics to see where the problems are and what needs to be done, or where the weaknesses are with your staff. So those are essentially the levels of a business. So that's where we're at. So that's why I said, we can do a lot of other little stuff that needs to be done. But is that going to do anything to take you past 60 visits a week? Nope. Not at all. Not until you get your first full-time person. And I call those the anchor. Your full-time people are your anchors. They're the people that pretty much are going to give you a lifestyle that you want, that you dream of. And that's why it's so important to know how to hire and train and manage staff, especially know how to pick good staff. So that's what the training is that we do with staff when we go into what are all the major categories when we go and hire staff. Well, number one, what's the role? What's their role? Number two is you have to match the role with that person's personality, because if they have a different personality than what's expected in that role, what they're responsible for in the business, doesn't matter how much training you do, it's not going to work. So you have to know personality profiles. You got to know how to interpret people. You got to know how to look at them and read them and interpret them to define what role. There's typically only 3 roles in a chiropractic office. There's the front desk, the back desk that does, the back person that does therapy and helps with marketing, and then an insurance person. That's it. That's the typical chiropractic office right there. And if you're busy enough to have three, typically the insurance person only does insurance or helps, that is the second help at the front desk and at the back during the main hours in the early morning and late afternoon. In the late morning and early afternoon, they're doing insurance. So that's how that works. That at that point, you should be seeing over 200 patient visits a week, even over 250. So to have three full-time people, because you certainly can run an office very effectively and efficiency with seeing 200 visits a week or less. Have a front desk person full-time, a back desk therapy person that helps with the marketing, and everything's designed that they're all doing their jobs, and everything's designed to you do as little as possible and move all of your time to adjusting patients. Everything else you do in your office that's not adjusting patients or doing an examination or re-exam or x-rays is wasting your time for money. So that's what this whole thing's about, is learn how to do less and less, learn how to become more and more of a manager, and learn how to spend more of your time doing the things that are more effective and less time to no time doing things that aren't very effective or aren't very useful or that you shouldn't even be doing anyway. And that's what it takes to run a business. And it's a continual growth. It's a continual education on being a business owner. Chiropractors think, oh, I just need to learn how to adjust and, have a staff member. I'm like, no, there's a lot more to being a successful business owner. You got to learn how to grow through all these different phases, and most chiropractors don't. That's why the average chiropractor sees 107 visits a week. That's usually about 100 visits less than what they could be seeing. Because they would, if they could, if there were patients lined up at the door, they would treat them. They just don't know how to get them lined up at the door. So instead, they waste a lot of time in their office and waste a lot of potential revenue is lost, even though they're there, the office is there, the lights are on, they got insurance, there's malpractice insurance, there's a phone, there's tables, there's therapy, and there's a staff member. Now you have an empty office or a partially empty office. Seeing 100 visits a week, you're at 50% productivity. Well, that's a lot of money. It's $250,000 a year lost. And it doesn't take many years at $250,000 a year to invest before you don't have to work anymore, before you can create a passive six-figure income and you don't have to work anymore. So those are the different levels. So that's the checklist. Now, obviously, there's a lot of detail to everything I talked about. That was the big overview right there. So you have to look internally and you have to say, okay, wait a minute, where am I? So we'll start with patient education, and that's when we patient retention, and that's why we do that breakdown analysis. And in the beginning, it's good to do that every 4 months to really increase your skill level, to learn where you're weak. And the statistics are the only thing that's going to tell you where you're weak, because you'll never look to where you're weak. We never want to look at our weak spots. So you have to do a statistical analysis to see where you're losing patients, and then you have to increase that skill level, wherever that is, to whatever it is you want it to be. Then you go to the marketing. You go, okay, well, the 8% marketing, to be honest with you, it's pretty easy. It's just advertising. Communicating to your past patients, even if it's just a simple email once a week. That's pretty easy. Doing the insurance videos is pretty easy. It does take some time. It's pretty easy. Does it take much money? No. I give you the templates. It's free to upload them to YouTube. You have to know, you got to know what to say and you got to SEO it. And then the third category is is Google for Business. That's for the reviews, the Google 3-pack. That's where that's typically the third place patients will look when they're looking for a chiropractor. And does that take much effort? No. Does it take some labor? Yes. Does it take consistency? Yes. Is it difficult? No. Is it worth doing? Yes. Are you going to get a ton of new patients from it? No. And then you go to condition videos. Is how much labor and time and money does that cost? Well, it costs essentially nothing. I give you the templates. I teach you how to do the SEO. So labor does take a little labor, but after you do it, it's done. You don't have to keep putting labor in. It's over. So we're, when it comes to time, money, and effort, we're talking about some really inexpensive things here, especially after they're initially done. The only thing that takes regular follow-up is the Google for Business reviews. That's it. And then same with the sign. Once the marketing for the sign is done, it's done. So those 5 categories doesn't take much labor, money or labor at all. It takes a little bit of time initially, and then it doesn't take much time at all after that. And what little the labor does take for Google for Business, and you're talking about 2 reviews a day. You're talking about talking to somebody for 3 minutes to 6, 7 minutes. So you're talking about two 7-minute conversations a day. But you got to know what to say. Okay, so that'll create a few more new patients. Will it create a ton? No. Put those into your patient retention, but now you'll be able to see them because you got a staff member. Now you'll create a vacuum and you'll be able to take on more new patients. As soon as you bring on a first staff person, your practice is going to shoot up pretty fast, about 120 to 130, just because you created a vacuum, number one. And number two, you'll start doing some really simple, easy marketing.
Right.
So as soon as you just do a little bit of marketing, you'll create a few more new patients, and then you put those back into your patient retention, and now you've gone from 60 to 120, anywhere from 1 to 130 patient visits a week. Then you run into your next problem. Typically, it's motivation right now. That a lot of chiropractors puts out because they're making over a 6-figure income right about now. So that gets to be one real issue. Then the next issue is knowledge and skill again, because now your knowledge and skills got to go to a higher level to take your business to another level. And then the next issue is labor. You've got to get another employee back there to do all the therapies. As much as you can teach them. I taught my staff not only all the marketing systems, all the therapies. I taught them how to do initial exams, initial consultations, and re-exams. So my staff knew how to do all the preliminary stuff. Because remember, I'm just trying to get myself to do one thing. Come in and nail the end of the consultation, nail the exam, do a little bit and adjust the patient. That's it. I want to just move everything in that direction, and everything else gets leveraged off, because that's where you're going to make the most money, is by moving everything in that direction, and stop screwing around with all kinds of little wasteful things. So when that happens, if you get to that point, now you're in total control of how much new business you can create and keep. Once you know educational sales and patient retention, and you have the staff members in place, that takes some training and management. A lot of doctors are terrible at hiring and training and managing and keeping staff.
Yeah.
That gets to be a real problem. And that's a skill set. You know, management is a skill set, no different than patient education. It's a skill set, but people don't look at it that way. You know, they're in a total state of unconscious incompetence. They think it's just going to happen. People are going to do what they want them to do. I'm like, no, doesn't work that way. So management gets to be an issue, but as soon as you know how to keep them, you know how to get new patients, and you've trained your staff to help out with all the different systems and marketing, you go to max out. That's typically when you get to 180, 220 visits a week. And that's what most chiropractors can typically see week in and week out without just being totally worn out at the end of the day. And that's with pretty high efficiency. That's somebody who's really smooth and good. And, you know, they're kind of a black belt in not only new patient education, but marketing and actually staff management. So that's the stage of business most business owners never reach. Most business owners never maximize their exchange of time for money. I'd say the vast majority of chiropractors, I'd say it's less than 10%. And then you get to a whole nother level now, which is how to leverage off your time and money. And that's through associate doctors or multiple offices. Well, we've got a whole nother learning curve again there. And that's a whole nother animal.